They came in gold-plated ships, humming with graviton pulses and cloaked in shimmering force fields, as if the laws of physics bent out of respect for their empire. The Velran High Command had cataloged thousands of worlds, subjugated hundreds, and never once encountered meaningful resistance from species still bound to fossil fuels. When their long-range scans confirmed that Earth's mechanized surface units used combustion engines and projectile-based munitions, laughter rippled through the Velran war halls. Steel boxes that belched smoke. Commander Zeldar sneered, his eyes gleaming with contempt as holograms of human tanks hovered over the war table. They call them tanks. How quaint. He wasn't alone. Strategists dismissed human weapons as relics, inefficient and crude. Plasma weavers and psi warriors, trained in the art of quantum-synchronized warfare, debated whether deploying even a quarter of a fleet would be overkill. One junior analyst suggested a light probe force. Another joked that deploying infantry at all might risk wasting rations. The consensus: Earth would fall not with a scream, but a shrug. In orbit, the Velran flagship Eminence of Stars relayed its first broadcast to the human networks in over 200 languages. A synthesized voice offered terms of surrender, subjugation in exchange for survival. No retaliation would be permitted. Any resistance would be met with overwhelming precision. They even offered to preserve parts of human culture for archival curiosity. The transmission ended with silence from Earth. A minute passed, then two. No response. The Velran communications officer double-checked the channels. Is their system malfunctioning? Commander Zeldar narrowed his gaze. No, they're stalling. They think silence means defiance. Orders were issued. A cleansing operation would begin in 72 hours. The Mojave sector, identified as a key human military region due to its prior installations and testing grounds, would serve as the staging area for the demonstration strike. Afterward, other regions would be subjugated in sequence. It would be fast, clean, and final. The only real concern voiced during the pre-deployment briefing was over terrain. Earth's deserts could jam sensor signals due to particulate interference, and the magnetic field had peculiar fluctuations. No matter, a tech priest muttered, their weapons can't reach us. Back on Earth, the remnants of Earth's Defense Command watched the broadcast with clenched jaws. They were tired, outgunned. Satellites had been wiped out within minutes of the Velrans entering orbit. Communications were limited to secure ground channels now, and most strategic infrastructure had been lost before the first shot was fired. Still, there was no capitulation. Not because humanity believed it could win conventionally, but because giving up had never really been part of its wiring. Throughout history, humans had fought when it was illogical. They had bled for inches of mud, for honor, for flags, for stubbornness. Sometimes they'd lost everything, but sometimes when a math said they shouldn't, they won. And so, within a hangar buried beneath decades of dust and disuse, lights flickered on. A hidden base beneath the desert floor roared to life as turbines spun and gears ground against time. A team of engineers, veterans, and volunteers gathered around a shape obscured by a massive tarp. The cover was peeled back. What sat beneath wasn't sleek or glowing or elegant. It was a brute block of steel, grimy and worn, its paint chipped, its frame weathered, but whole. An M1 Abrams main battle tank. The room fell quiet. One of the engineers, a young woman with oil-streaked cheeks, ran a hand along its side. We're really doing this? A grizzled voice answered. Yeah, we are. Captain Elias Ramirez stepped forward, uniform mismatched and faded, eyes sharp. He had driven these things in a world that no longer existed. He looked up at the tank with the reverence of a priest. They think we're broken, he said quietly. Let's remind them what humans build when we're desperate. The plan wasn't flashy. No AI, no nanotech, just armor, firepower, and old-school mechanics, what the Velrans had written off as laughable. But Earth wasn't betting on technology. It was betting on something older, the stubborn belief that being underestimated was the best kind of advantage. As the countdown to the Velran assault ticked toward zero, somewhere in the heart of the Mojave, a single tank rumbled to life. Not a symbol, not a relic, A weapon. The M1 Abrams sat in the desert hangar like a dormant predator, surrounded by the scent of oil, metal, and tension. Its treads were worn but intact, its cannons still solid despite decades of disuse. Ramirez circled the tank slowly, hand trailing across the hull. This wasn't just nostalgia. This was necessity. Around him, a team of 9 worked without pause. Engineers, veterans, a mechanic who once built monster trucks, a cyberneticist who volunteered after losing her brother during the orbital strikes. They weren't soldiers. Not anymore. But they had something more dangerous: conviction. "Electronics suite is junk," muttered Krieger, the wiry X-Field tech. "We can wire in a neural control relay from that crash drone, tie it to the targeting array. Might get a half-decent lock." Ramirez nodded. "Don't care about perfection. I want reliable. Give me a system I can trust, even if we lose power." "What if we rig the optics manually?" one of the engineers suggested. "Old-school scopes. Bypass the digital relay entirely." "Do it." They worked with what little remained. Dismantled civilian satellites provided power converters. A downed Valeran scout pod yielded a high-frequency jamming node, now bolted crudely onto the Abrams turret. Ammunition was scarce, but they salvaged depleted uranium shells from bunkers forgotten by the world. No backup. Every shot would count. Humanity's militaries had once moved beyond tanks. But now, the war had regressed to something elemental: steel versus arrogance. Ramirez convened the crew near sundown. Dust coated their uniforms, and exhaustion clung to their limbs, but no one faltered. "I won't sugarcoat this," he said. "This isn't some grand counterattack. It's a message. The Empire thinks we're finished. They believe technology wins wars." He pointed to the tank. "This is our rebuttal." They named it Judgment, not for symbolism, for function. At the same time, high-altitude scans showed Valeran troop transports entering the upper atmosphere. Ground reports confirmed a deployment route cutting through the Mojave toward what they believed was a civilian evacuation zone. It wasn't. It was a trap. The Empire didn't believe humans capable of organized defense anymore. That was the flaw in their logic. They saw resistance as futile, therefore impossible. But in that assumption, they left themselves open. Predictable. Earth's remaining command approved the mission without hesitation. There were no debates, no alternative plans. Ramirez and his crew were on their own. Just after midnight, the Abrams roared to life. Its engine coughed and rumbled, shaking dust from every corner of the hangar. No digital camouflage, no stealth field, just the deep, growling defiance of a machine built to kill. The desert swallowed its movements as the tank rolled forward. Crew members operated with near-silent coordination. Loader, gunner, driver. No one asked if this would work. No one questioned the odds. They passed empty roads, husks of burnt-out cars, broken drones littering the sand. The aftermath of Earth's initial collapse. But for the first time in weeks, they were moving toward the enemy. Ramirez scanned the horizon through binoculars. Valeran landers glinted under moonlight, sleek, floating obelisks descending like silent judges. Escort units formed up, low-profile anti-personnel skimmers, infantry clusters, sensor drones. Fast, agile, arrogant. They had the numbers. They had the advantage, but they didn't know what was coming. Inside the tank, the crew checked final diagnostics. Gunner locked in the first 2 targets. Loader prepped the Sabo round. Krieger grunted, holding a jury-rigged targeting linked steady with one gloved hand and duct tape. Ramirez keyed the comm. "First strike is ours. Make it count." He didn't give a speech. No theatrics. Just a simple order. Engage. They weren't trying to win the war tonight. They were proving that humanity hadn't rolled over and died. That even in the face of overwhelming odds, someone, somewhere, would always fight back. The Valerans had mastered annihilation. Precision strikes. Targeted vaporization. But they hadn't planned for something as archaic and as devastating as a 60-ton armored war machine cresting a ridge at full throttle, cannon loaded and heart-pounding. The Empire believed Earth had nothing left but ruins and ghosts. They were about to meet one of those ghosts. and it had teeth. The first shot echoed across the desert like a thunderclap, tearing through the silence and slamming into the side of a Velran skimmer. The vehicle, built for atmospheric mobility and light infantry transport, wasn't armored to survive a kinetic impact. The sabot round punched through it with contemptuous ease, detonating its energy cell mid-air. A bloom of fire lit up the sky as fragments spun into the sand. The Velran formation staggered. They hadn't expected resistance, certainly not a direct engagement. The command AI flagged an unknown armored signature, but classified it as historical anomaly. Before it could update its threat matrix, the Abrams fired again. Second round, high-explosive anti-tank. It struck a forward recon walker and ripped it in half at the waist. Sparks flew as limbs spasmed, artificial muscles twitching in the sand. Inside the Abrams, Ramirez called targets like he was back in a war he thought he'd left behind. The gunner adjusted for distance. Loader shoved another round into the breach. Dust and heat battered them from all sides, but the crew worked like one organism, experienced, ruthless, mechanical. The Velrans tried to adapt. Drones deployed in swarms, flanking wide. Hover troops descended with shoulder-mounted disintegrators. Blue plasma bolts sliced through the air, some striking the Abrams' exterior and sending flashes of energy across the reactive armor plating. But the tank endured. It wasn't sleek or smart. It wasn't supposed to be. It was a hammer, a brute force answer to the question of dominance. The Velrans fired like they were playing a game of distance and elegance. The Abrams fought like it meant to bury the enemy under steel and fire. A targeting drone hovered above, feeding data to the enemy's ground commander. Ramirez spotted it through the narrow scope, gauged its altitude, gave the order. Up one. Fire. The shell traced a perfect arc and clipped the drone dead center. It spiraled into the sand. With it went the Velrans' tactical awareness. Suddenly blind, their formation broke. Skimmers zigzagged erratically. Infantry units activated personal shields, but they were calibrated for energy weapons, not solid projectiles moving at hypersonic speeds. A squad of hover troops approached from the right, aiming to flank. Ramirez didn't flinch. He let them close the gap. When they were within 30 meters, he rotated the turret and unleashed a canister round, essentially a giant shotgun blast. The troopers were shredded in an instant, armor crumpling like foil. Reload. Heat. Ramirez snapped. Ready. Next target. Enemy transport. 12 o'clock. The Abrams pivoted slightly and fired. The transport exploded in a mushroom of flame and twisted metal. Screams, raw, organic, cut through the Velran comms network for the first time. Panic had set in. Their doctrine had no answer for this. Ground warfare was supposed to be obsolete. Their infantry had never trained against mechanized resistance. They weren't soldiers. They were enforcers, and they were dying. More drones buzzed in, smaller now, their frames designed for reconnaissance. They swarmed the tank, trying to disrupt its optics. Ramirez leaned forward, flipped a switch Krieger had installed, jury-rigged electromagnetic burst from the Velran jammer they'd salvaged. A surge pulsed outward. Every drone in a 100-meter radius dropped from the sky, twitching as their cores fried. Inside the tank, sweat poured from every pore. The heat was unbearable. Systems ran hot. Alarms blinked red, but they pressed on. No complaints. No hesitation. Krieger reported. Armor integrity 70%. Left treads got some plasma scoring. Still mobile. Barely. Then we keep going. One final skimmer tried to retreat. Ramirez saw the desperation in its erratic flight path. The pilot wasn't following orders anymore. He was trying to live. The Abrams gunner tracked it patiently, adjusted for wind, elevation, speed. Firing. The shell struck dead center. The skimmer collapsed in midair, plummeting like a dead bird into the sand. And then silence. No more plasma fire. No more buzzing drones. Just the rumble of the Abrams engine and the crackle of burning wreckage. Ramirez looked through the optics one last time. What remained of the Velran forward force was scattered, broken, and burning. The Empire's cleansing strike had ended in ruin. He keyed the comm again. All targets neutralized. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They weren't done. They were still deep behind enemy lines, and a larger war loomed overhead. But they'd won. A single tank, one crew, against the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Ramirez exhaled and leaned back against the worn interior plating. "They'll remember this," he said, not as a boast, but a certainty. And far above, in orbit, Valoran Command began to realize that this wasn't a skirmish. It was a message. Above the Earth, aboard the eminence of stars, alarms blared for the first time since the Valorans arrived in orbit. Tactical feeds were distorted, scrambled by jamming pulses of primitive origin. Sensor readouts were inconsistent. Damage reports, previously non-existent, now surged in volume and urgency. A single line repeated across the status matrix: loss of ground unit cohesion. Commander Zeldar stood frozen before the main viewport, his mind struggling to reconcile the footage. One tank, one ancient Earth weapon. It had annihilated a strike force. Not dented, not repelled, obliterated. And in the chaos of the Mojave operation, the unit's command AI had been destroyed. No survivors. "Ow," he hissed. No one answered. The analysts were silent. No algorithms could predict this outcome. The only variable unaccounted for was human irrationality. Back on the surface, Ramirez and his crew abandoned the tank under cover of dusk. The Abrams had survived, but it wouldn't last another engagement. Its systems were degraded, armor scorched, treads half-melted. But it had done what it needed to do. The signal went out from the Mojave uplink node before Valoran orbital forces could fully re-establish a blockade. A transmission sent in clear code. Not encrypted, deliberate. It included only two things: a satellite image of the battlefield, charred skimmers, shattered drones, molten transports, and a brief message. "We're still here." Across the globe, hidden resistance cells intercepted it. Civilians, soldiers, exiles, even black market AI clusters read the message and knew what it meant. Earth had drawn blood, not symbolically, tactically, tangibly. For the first time, the Valorans looked vulnerable. In South America, a convoy of abandoned armor was unearthed. In Eastern Europe, old anti-air systems were recalibrated with hybrid Valoran targeting optics. In Africa, solar farms were rerouted to power military bunkers thought defunct. The world didn't unite under flags. It didn't rally under a single leader. It simply moved because someone had proven that the enemy could bleed. Inside the Empire's high court chamber orbiting the third moon of Velra Prime, the footage was reviewed 100 times. The tank, the crew, the cratered battlefield. War priests insisted it was a fluke, that with proper adjustments, humans would be broken. Analysts warned otherwise. This wasn't about the weapon, it was the mindset. Commander Zeldar received a report that chilled him more than any enemy fire. Several Valoran units on Earth had failed to report in, scattered across different zones, not connected to the Mojave operation. No contact, no survivors. Intercepted comms hinted at ambushes, sabotage, resistance. Worse, coordinated resistance. Earth wasn't just reacting anymore. It was planning. The Empire initiated recalibration protocols. Troop deployments were doubled. Air superiority units readjusted their engagement range. Shield harmonics were tuned specifically to block kinetic projectiles. Yet morale dipped. The shock of the Mojave loss created a fracture, small but real. That fracture spread through whispers. That humans were willing to die without hesitation. That they used ancient weapons not because they lacked alternatives, but because it was what they trusted. That they fought not for glory or conquest, but because they had nothing left to lose. In war, technology mattered. But resolve, raw, implacable resolve, was a force the Valorans had never accounted for. Weeks later, during a targeted strike against what the Empire believed was a minor comms relay in Kazakhstan, their landers were destroyed by a coordinated barrage from human artillery positions, camouflaged and silent until the first shot. The equipment was mismatched. The tactics were crude, but it worked. The Empire reclassified Earth from subjugation target to hostile adaptive threat. Ramirez and his crew never returned to Mojave. They disappeared into the network of resistance fighters, using what they'd learned to help others. Some said they died in a skirmish outside Denver. Others claimed they made it to the Canadian underground, helping rebuild fractured command structures. It didn't matter, because the legend of the tank remained. The image of fire and steel crashing through the most elite force the Empire had sent. It wasn't just a battle report. It was a story passed between hands, across whispers and screens, repeated to inspire those with nothing but scrap and fire. The Velerans came expecting conquest. What they got was a species too stubborn to bow, too reckless to quit, too dangerous to leave unchecked. A species that, when backed into a corner, didn't surrender. It loaded the next round.